Hello and welcome once again to one of my retrospectives, a series where I'm working my way through my personal gaming memories and taking a close look at some of the history of each title, its design and its gameplay. So far my focus has been on the Sega Mega Drive, and that's because for quite a few years it was the only console I had, and in fact my early recollections of the game we're looking at today is not actually from owning it myself, but from playing it on other friends' Game Boys and watching them play it. It was around the launch of Pokemon Yellow when I first got my hands on my own Game Boy. In fact it was a Game Boy Color. I then borrowed Link's Awakening off a friend and I finally got to play it start to finish. So I can remember this game often being seen around the school playground, at least until Pokemon existed. It was the game that you'd often find people playing in different corners of the playground, all at different parts of the game, sharing tips and tricks for some of the puzzles. But this certainly is an interesting game to dive into, and it's because of that I've chosen to feature this as my first Game Boy game in the Retrospective Series. So let's start with how this game came to be. The Zelda series has been around since the NES, with the first game being released in 1986 in Japan and 1987 in Europe and the USA. Zelda 2 followed in 1988, and A Link to the Past followed on the SNES in 1991. At this point, within Nintendo's development department, programmer Kazuki Morita had created a Zelda-like game with one of the first Game Boy development kits, and he was using it to see what the platform was capable of. But soon other staff members from the Nintendo development team had joined him on his after-hours project, and it became somewhat of an after-school club. The results of these experiments were looking promising, and so after the release of A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, director Takeshi Tezuka asked for permission to develop a handheld Zelda title. The initial intention was to make a handheld port of A Link to the Past, but it soon evolved into its own original game. The project was given permission to go ahead, and most of the original development team for A Link to the Past then joined the project, and a year and a half later, Link's Awakening was ready for release. The scriptwriter for the game was told that the game would be somewhat of a spin-off, and he was given instructions to omit common series elements such as the location, Princess Zelda, the Triforce, and so on, and as a consequence the proposed idea was an island with an egg on top of a mountain. With so many of the core Zelda elements missing from the game, the development team involved recall the experience as if they were almost making a Zelda parody game, with cameo appearances from other Nintendo characters such as Yoshi, Kirby, Chomp, Goombas, and many more. But honestly, there is so much to read about how this game came to be. I've given you a very brief skim over the information I came across, but there's so much more out there if that's your kind of thing, but I do like to try and keep these videos to a reasonable length. Now it's probably worth mentioning at this point that the game did receive an update and a re-release in 1998 on the Game Boy Color. It was re-released as Link's Awakening DX. It featured a color palette update, an extra color dungeon that could only be opened if you were playing on a Game Boy Color, and compatibility with the Game Boy printer. Yes, you did hear me right, the Game Boy printer. Probably one of the most underutilized and pointless accessories the Game Boy ever had. I only knew one person that ever had one. But the printer was utilized by a new character in the game who would take photos of you in different locations of the game at different points, and you could print them off, I guess. So let's move on and take a look at the setting. As I previously mentioned, the writer was given instructions to omit most of the series staples, and with that, this game doesn't actually take place in Hyrule. Princess Zelda is nothing more than a passing comment, and Ganon is nothing more than a mere form during a boss fight. And the Triforce? Nowhere to be seen. However, the fact that all these things are missing from the game doesn't take away the fact that it's an absolutely fantastic game, and it does still fit within the Legend of Zelda timeline. The events in this game are supposed to take place after A Link to the Past from the Super Nintendo. With Link having restored peace to Hyrule, he journeyed to foreign lands to strengthen his skills, in case Ganon ever returned. And it was whilst he was sailing back to Hyrule that his ship was struck by a storm, and it's left shipwrecked on the shore of Kulahint Island. And so with that, you begin your journey around the island following clues given to you by an owl and a character called Aurea who communicates with you via telephone. The owl tells Link that he needs to awaken the Windfish, the guardian of the island, if he wants to return home. And so Link's journey begins to assemble the 8 instruments of the sirens from various dungeons on the island and awaken the Windfish. Alongside collecting the keys for the dungeons and tracking down the instruments, your weapon and tool collection grows, each one aiding you in furthering your progression on the island. Ultimately, it provides a decent amount of time playing the game, and as kids we spent many hours trying to solve some of the puzzles. Nowadays the puzzles don't feel so complex, maybe because I know the solutions, but maybe that's also thousands of hours of gaming. So gameplay wise you play as Link, of course. Not Zelda. It's definitely not Zelda. Yes, unfortunately I was one of those idiots that for many years thought the Legends of Zelda meant you played as Zelda. I wasn't a Nintendo boy, alright? I'm not to blame. But you spend the majority of the time in the overhead view navigating the island, solving puzzles, slaying enemies, and as previously mentioned, gathering 8 instruments to wake the Windfish, and ultimately leave the island. There is also somewhat of a side quest collecting seashells for powerful upgrades, and some mini games such as a crane game and fishing that don't take up too much time and they are easy enough. Your health is controlled by the usual how many hearts you have, with a heart container being the reward for a boss kill or for collecting 4 pieces of heart spread throughout the map. Standard Zelda practice has been resumed. You can have 2 items or weapons equipped at the same time, which you assign to the A and B buttons respectively, from an inventory screen that pauses gameplay when accessed. Each screen of the world is static, meaning that the world doesn't scroll when you navigate it. Instead, the next screen somewhat slides into view and then you carry on moving from the side you entered. This gave the game somewhat of a grid-like navigation. Thankfully, this game did include a save feature, which was much needed, as a single sitting of this game is quite the task, especially if you haven't completed it before. Now, it's normally this point of the video that I would recommend if you've never played this game, you totally should, and I am going to recommend that because it is a true classic. It's appeared in several game publications' lists of best video games of all time. It's certainly not a title to be sniffed at. However, in 2019, this game got a huge remake. I was so hyped after the Nintendo Direct reveal that I knew I was going to be purchasing this on day one, and I didn't regret it. So if this is one Zelda adventure that you've missed out on, and you don't feel like digging out your old DMG01 and hunting down a copy of the game, then maybe the Switch remake is the way to go. It holds up really well, and while it feels weird not having the world dividing into screens that scroll when you reach the edge, the grid-like navigation I mentioned previously, I couldn't have asked for a better tribute to one of my personal favourite games of all time. So as usual, I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective, and I would love to hear your memories of this game in the comments, or even some of your own early gaming memories. An edited version of the Twitch stream will be appearing on the channel later this week. You can also catch me on Twitch Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, and often over the weekend on Saturdays, with Saturdays being the day I'm aiming to stream more retro content that will form the basis of these retrospectives. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more of these, and with that, I will see you next time.